Life Audio.
On the next Encouragement for You podcast, the late Dr. Frank Minirth talks about 5 significant Old Testament women and Missions Authority Steve Saint on reconciliation and forgiveness.
Welcome to the Encouragement for You podcast, brought to you by Encouragement Communications in association with the Salem Web Network and is part of the Life Audio Faith Toolkit series. For more inspirational, faith-affirming podcasts, visit lifeaudio.com. In just a moment, your host, Don Hawkins, will introduce today's episode. First, a word from our sponsors.
At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than money. It's a way to support the people, causes, and community you love, because helping you put your faith into action is at the heart of what we do. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at Thrivent.com.
The late Dr. Frank Minirth was not only a respected Christian psychiatrist who provided help for many people, he was also an avid student of the Scriptures. In our first segment of today's podcast episode, Dr. Frank Minirth joins host Don Hawkins to talk about 5 significant women from the Old Testament.
Who's the first of these women from Scripture that you have picked out, Frank?
Well, I picked out Eve, and I picked out Eve because she was the mother of the human race, and perhaps many of you listening, you've been a leader also, but she failed, and maybe you've fallen somewhat, and we want to encourage you.
You know, Frank, one of the things that frequently happens in all of our lives today is that we've been affected by the sins of Adam and Eve, the choices that they made. And Eve was susceptible to temptation. And in the New Testament, in 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about how Eve was deceived. And sometimes we don't like to think about the fact that we can be deceived, but even godly people can be deceived. And sometimes we fall into the trap of false beliefs. We believe that we can control things in our lives that we're unable to control. We believe we can handle certain temptations that in reality may sweep us away. And it may be, Frank, sometimes things happen to us and our lives kind of spin out of control because of the things that we've been deceived about. Even though sometimes things happen to us that really we're not deceived about. But when they are, we need wise and godly counsel. Yeah.
Now, number 2 on my list is Sarah. She was the mother of the nation of Israel. And she was so beautiful at age 90 that a king, Abimelech, you recall, fell in love with her and was in big-time trouble over that.
Yes.
And so we have many beautiful women out there. She unduly took things into her hands in Genesis 16.
Right.
Remember the issue of Hagar?
Yes, I do.
And so if you're a beautiful lady, but at times you've sort of gone too far, then forgive yourself. There's hope for you too.
And when we have failed and made bad decisions, it is wonderful to know that Scripture makes it clear that we can come back to the Lord, our fellowship can be restored, and sometimes we fall into that deception, that false belief that nothing can restore us, nothing can put things back together for us. And the reality is there is hope. As I think about Sarah, Frank, one of the things that comes to mind is that she was listed in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11. Not only was Abraham, her husband, listed, but Sarah, it says, herself received strength to conceive when she was beyond childbearing years. You pointed out accurately that she tried to rush things up. She tried to take matters into her own hands and suggested to her husband that they bypass the normal process and bring Hagar into the picture, and that created a great deal of difficulty in their family life with Ishmael and the conflict with Isaac. And yet there is, again, as we've mentioned, when we make those bad choices, there's forgiveness, there's grace, there's restoration. And in her case, even though she and Abraham waited 25 years, God finally rewarded their faith. I think, Frank, another lesson that we can learn from Sarah is the fact that this dear godly lady eventually saw the answer to her prayers and to her dreams come about.
Number 3 is one of my favorites. It's Deborah. Remember in Judges chapter 4, this lady was a judge in Israel. And how many women have you known in the church that some of them are just gifted with unusually good sense? They're great judges. They have great discernment. Remember, they were facing the Canaanites, and man, what a judge she was! How wise she was! So, my hat is off to all of you wise women that are out there.
Yeah, wisdom and leadership skills. Deborah was not only a judge and able to make those wise decisions and give direction to others, a good evidence of a woman who had great leadership abilities, but she also was able to encourage. You remember there was a man named Barak who was also a military leader in Israel at the time, and Barak was scared to death. He was afraid to go out and take on the enemies of Israel, and she encouraged him to go, and he basically said, "If you'll go with me, if you'll go along and hold my hand, then I'll be willing to go." And God gave them a great victory. And Deborah was one of those ladies who had leadership skills. God blessed her. God used her. Sometimes we need that wisdom of somebody who can just help us think through matters, and Deborah was one of those people who helped a lot of people in that way. Frank, we think about these ladies, none of them was perfect, but they were great examples for us. They were people who obviously were used by God, but the reality is none of us is perfect, and because of that, we need the Lord Jesus Christ, right?
Well, even Sarah they were unbelievable. And many of you out there are too. And Deborah, Don, she was just superior.
Yeah.
So many of you are. So this program is to encourage all of you women. Number 4 on my list, Don, is Naomi.
Naomi.
And she was in a foreign country, Moab, and she returned. And Don, the lesson there, and I've heard you speak on this, is maybe maybe some of you have been in a foreign country, and maybe you need to come on back to your local church or come on back to the Lord. Maybe you've been away, maybe away too long. Come on back.
And Frank, Naomi's name originally meant pleasant, and yet she became a very bitter woman, and one of the reasons is she had suffered great losses. Her husband had died. They'd been through a famine. Her 2 sons both died. She had 2 daughters-in-law, and there she was in a foreign country, away from all the people that she knew and loved and her relatives, away from the covenant people of God, the Israelites. And eventually she did. She said, "It's time to go back. I need to go back home to Bethlehem." But Frank, in the process, she had to deal with the fact that she was bitter toward God. And she said, "I went out full, and God brought me back empty." And the reality was God had not brought her back empty. God had actually provided for her. And as she came back and she and Ruth began to live from one day to the next back in Bethlehem in fellowship with God, God provided somebody who not only took care of Ruth and who loved Ruth, a man named Boaz. He also provided through Boaz a grandson for Naomi and also the care that Naomi needed. And, sometimes, Frank, we get away from the Lord and we become depressed. Naomi, I think, is an example of a woman who became very seriously depressed. And I don't think women are necessarily more susceptible to depression than men. I think there were times when David was depressed in the Old Testament and others as well. But I know you've talked to a lot of people who've been depressed. How would you have counseled Naomi given her situation?
Well, Don, first of all, I would do what we're doing, just try to encourage you. I mean, Don, think about it. How many thousands and thousands of dear women saints are listening now, and they've lost a husband, they've lost someone very dear to them, and they're just hurting, and there's hurting. So there's many lessons from that we can learn from Naomi. But yeah, I would do what we're doing now, Don. I would say, let us encourage you. Thank God for you, and we want to encourage you. If you're hurting, we all need to be encouraged at times.
Who's number 5, Frank?
Number 5 is Ruth. She was a lady without a family. Many of you listening, you're women without a family. And if so, again, we just want to pray for you, want to encourage you, want to thank God for you. Because even though you're without a family, many of you, Don, they're on the prayer line. Many thousands of women are praying for the ones that they know are hurting. While they're hurting, they're praying for others.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I appreciate about this ministry. There are those of you who pray for and with us and for the requests that we have, and it's always our privilege. Frank, as I think about Ruth, I can't help thinking about the fact that she, like Naomi, was a widow. Not only did she have no family, she was a widow. She wound up in a foreign country. She was with people who were strangers to her. Literally, the only person she knew in the entire country was her mother-in-law, Naomi, who, as we already mentioned, had her own problems, her own issues, was bitter and struggling with things. And yet Ruth had told Naomi of her faith in the God of Israel. And some of the greatest verses in the Bible, Ruth 1, verses 16 and 17, where Naomi had said, "Why don't you go back to your people and to your God?" It says, "And Ruth said, 'Do not entreat me to leave you or to return from following after you, for wherever you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God.'" Now, that's significant because she was turning her back on the pagan gods of Moab and pledging her faith to the God of Israel. And she said, "Wherever you die, I'll die, and there I'll be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me." And so the result of that, God rewarded her faith.
We'll be back with more after a brief word from our sponsors. And don't forget to listen for Dawn's live weekend talk show, Encouragement Live, heard Saturdays at 7:05 p.m. Central Time on American Family Radio and other radio stations around the country, as well as on the worshipchannel.org.
For some of us, personal finances aren't just personal. They include loved ones, neighbors, the communities we call home, and the causes we hold in our hearts. At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than just money. We help you put your plans into motion and faith into action so you can do more for the ones in your heart. Because sometimes all you need to make a difference is someone to help you make it happen. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at Thrivent.com.
It's hard to believe that you could extend forgiveness to someone who murdered your father, but that's exactly what Steve Saint extended to the man who became like a grandfather to his children. Forgiveness and reconciliation are the topics Steve discusses with Encouragement for You host Don Hawkins.
You know, people ask me all the time, how did you forgive the man, especially referring to Minkai or the men, Minkai, Dewey, Kimo, Nimonga, Gikita, who killed my dad, and Roger and Pete, Ned and Jim. And I know that they want this great story, but and I always feel like I'm going to disappoint them, but the truth of the matter is that I never did forgive them. Now, it isn't that we aren't really great friends. There's no animosity between us. But to forgive somebody, you really have to feel like you're wronged. And I know this sounds strange, but it never really occurred to me as I grew up that these people had wronged me. Now, don't misunderstand. You know, it was a terrible, but the reason that I've never felt like I should forgive those men is that I watched how my mom and how my Aunt Rachel and Elizabeth Elliott, I called her Aunt Betty, and Aunt Barb, and Aunt Mary Lou, and Aunt Olive. I watched how they reacted to the death of their husbands, and none of them ever seemed to resent either the Waodani or God for allowing or organizing what happened. And so it never occurred to me, hey, if they weren't upset about it, why would a young kid be upset? So, because I didn't feel that I had been wronged, and it wasn't that I didn't think something terrible had happened, but if there was forgiveness in my story with Minkai and the Waodani, I really think that it's more forgiveness the other way around. Not in that they had to forgive me for having killed my father, but in their culture it was not only acceptable, but it was expected that if somebody hurt somebody, killed somebody in your family, that it was your responsibility, not only your right, but your responsibility to get even by killing them or somebody in their family. And yet when I was a little kid and went in to live with the Waodani, instead of doing me harm so that I couldn't harm them later on, they took me out, and especially Minkai taught me the skills that I could have used and that he would have expected me to use to kill him, to take vengeance for killing my dad, and he never did. It really is amazing when we do things God's way, how much better things work. But I mean, that's the upside. But this week I confronted a friend that I work with and said, hey, things aren't going too well. We're just not being as productive here at iTech as we ought to be, and some things need to change. And he turned around and he said, there's some things that I need to talk to you about. I said, really? What? And he said, give me a chance, I'll make a list. And I had this sneaking suspicion that this wasn't going to make me real happy. And you know what? He came back and he said, Steve, I do agree with some of the things that you're saying, but if I could be real honest. And then he started telling me, you do this, and instead of it helping productivity here at iTech, it really hurts productivity. And then there's this thing that you do that really makes it hard for me to organize what's going on, and then there's this thing, and I'll tell you what, it was not easy for me to listen to admonition for doing things that were not helping at an organization that I founded. And I began to realize, this can either blow up or it can get better. Now, it was a little bit easier for me because I was the first one to throw the punches, and I don't mean physically, but
of course,
to confront this very good friend. And then he turned around and confronted me, and then something really strange happened. Instead of quitting or deciding, I've had enough of this, he said, yeah, I'm okay. We're going to get through this, and I think we're going to be more productive. And I felt so badly that I felt I needed to call the staff in and apologize for being heavy-handed and for being so busy and so tired from running around the country and speaking, which I really have wanted to do less of, that I really didn't have the energy to be the encourager that I needed to be back home. And all of that to say that, I would guess that a little I'm sorry will probably make my relationship with the really very special people that I work with a little bit better. And it also was amazing to me that when I looked at the situation, I really, really could see things that other people weren't doing as well as they could be and they should be. And you know what? It's amazing how my perspective changed when they told me their perspective.
Yeah.
Let me take you back to a situation that happened a number of years ago when our only daughter, Stephanie, very suddenly and unexpectedly died after returning from a year away traveling with a Christian music group. She came home, and while we were having her welcome home party, she had a massive cerebral hemorrhage and died, and it marked our lives. It was the most unbelievably excruciating experience. And I can tell you at that point, there are some things that, tempt us to put on airs, but when something stunning like that happens, I remember thinking, this is one time when we certainly are going to be real, because we don't care what people think, we don't care who's going to like us. Something so earth-shattering has happened in our lives that now we want everything to be true, and in a very strange way, it affected me in that I started evaluating my life, and it was like somebody turned the page and there was a list of people that I'd had a falling out with. Now, it was a very short list, but I found myself, in the grief of Stephanie dying, I found myself just absolutely desperate to have no conflict on the records with anybody. Now, I think I don't know if this is your experience, and I don't think that many people, if any people, can go through life and not have a conflict with people. We live in a tense world. My question is, what do we do? What is the God-honoring way? What is the life-enriching way to deal with that? Because it just plain happens. And it doesn't just happen outside the church. And something that sticks in my craw is that somehow we've gotten some really strange ideas in the Christian family. One is that we think that if there is a conflict, that we have to pretend that it's not there. One concern that I have is that when we do that, not just when they do that, but when I do that, if I do that, if you do that, what we're doing is we're being unnatural. We're not being honest. The other thing is that I've noticed that in our culture here in North America, if we're going to go out and minister, and I don't mean to be derogatory, but we use that term so loose, it's a spiritual term, but when we do that, we have this crazy idea that we need to cover up, put makeup on all of our life scars so that we can go out there and be pristine and pure when we go to minister to others. That doesn't make any sense. In fact, the Bible says that God perfected Jesus as the author of our salvation through suffering. It's time that we started being real. And being real means that we recognize that we're all fallible, and that means that either we've got to pretend or just keep switching friends, or we've got to find a time. And this week it was my turn to admit, guys, I am sorry. I have not acted with the respect and the courtesy that I should have around our office. I don't think that's right.
Well, thank you, Steve Saint, for giving us encouragement and hope when we find it hard to experience forgiveness and reconciliation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Encouragement for You with Don Hawkins, host of Encouragement Live Radio and author of over 25 books, including Never Give Up and Master Discipleship Today. You can find more about Don and his books at encouragementlive.org. Encouragement for You is a production of Encouragement Communications with the Salem Web Network and lifeaudio.com. Editing by Phil Giebers, production by Elizabeth Andrade. If you enjoyed what you heard today, we'd love for you to head over to your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. It really does help people find us.
Let me take just a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on Encouragement for You. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
Stay encouraged and join us next time for Encouragement for You.
Are you concerned about tensions in the Middle East? Do you wonder where we're currently at in the biblical timeline? Are we really in the last days? Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Carl Muller with the Inside the Epicenter podcast. Every week, my co-host, best-selling author Joel Rosenberg and I answer those questions and more. You'll hear inside knowledge of our meetings with leaders at the highest levels of government in the U.S., Israel, and the Middle East, equipping you to filter the news with biblically sound insights. Find Inside the Epicenter on your favorite podcast app or go to joshuafund.com to listen and subscribe.